Hi everyone, welcome to this month's EA view on the archetype of Gemini. My name's Chahal and I'm joined today by Deva Green. Hey Deva.
Hi there.
We have Sue Hillyard joining us this time. Hi Sue.
Hi there. Good to be here.
Good to have you with us, Sue. And we also have Jordyn Smith joining us again this month. Hey Jordyn.
Hello, ladies.
So, Gemini, the journey of self-expression. Before we actually started this recording, we were just having a chat and we got very mercurial. And it's interesting. We are in the month of Gemini. The sun is in the sign of Gemini, and Gemini is the third house of the astrological wheel, and it's a yang mutable air sign, and it's ruled by the planet Mercury. And the Gemini is a left brain linear way of thinking. That's its main archetype. It's about how we intellectually process the phenomena of life that surrounds us. It's the way we relate to the world that we live in. Certain physical items. For example, I'm sitting on a chair. I'm talking through a computer. I'm living in a house. So they're all classifications that we give items to understand life that surrounds us. And Mercury is also the archetype of messenger in astrology, and that's an important archetype for Mercury, I feel, because it links to the mind and the intellect. And what is the messenger? It's where we share information. It's how we learn about things, and words are that we speak are a messenger, and also the words that are written down are a message. Just think of the books that you've read in your life, how powerful they've been. For myself, for example, the Pluto, the Journey of the Soul, written by Jeffrey Wolf Green, was a very powerful book that I read. So the words that I read was absorbed into my core being, and it changed literally the course of my life, my career. Today I'm sitting as an evolutionary astrologer talking to you. So if that book hadn't come into my life, and if I hadn't absorbed the words in that book, my life could have gone a different path. So just think about the books that you've read or the information that's come across and how it's helped you to grow. Ladies, I wanted to actually ask you what work or what books have changed your kind of life in a way. What's been very impactful for you? Apart from Jeffrey's book, of course, which has definitely hit all of us. Has there been, like, for example, I reread the Autobiography of a Yogi. I think it's such a phenomenal book. And each time I read it, I always get a different message from it. And I do read it at times where I'm feeling a little bit lost, I'd say. So I'm trying to find my place, in the world. And I'll pick that up just to reread Yogananda's words, because they hit a chord with me. So it has a deeper meaning for me. So is there any books that have hit a chord with you?
Well, I have one that got me into astrology and yoga back in the dark ages in the 70s, called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. And
Oh,
it was written by a New York Times reporter, Jess Stern, and he actually started out to debunk all of it and
hmm
ended up, being a believer. And it changed my life because it opened up, all of these possibilities, and I dove in head first.
yeah. It just that whole process of, that we talk about left brain thinking. The opposite of Gemini is Sagittarius, so it kind of merges both energies where you're reading something logically in a left brain process, and then the intuitive faculties kick in as well. So that's where I feel the balance comes in. And if you haven't read, for example, Pluto, the Journey of the Soul, please do read it. If you're here, I'm sure you've heard of it. And it's you get a deeper meaning of life and just understanding your own soul journey, which we're all on. But yeah, so Gemini also relates to, information, opinions that we all have. It's the voice that we use. It's not a coincidence that the throat chakra, could get my words out, is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury can also represent, you know, siblings, twins, short journeys that we take in life. So there's a diversity of archetypes that link to Gemini. Yeah. So just moving on from that, we are going to now move on to our transit of the month, which is the Gemini new moon, taking place on either June the 17th or 18th, depending on where you are. And Jordyn's going to kickstart us off on that.
Thank you, Rob. I was actually thinking about, I read this book by Krishnamurti called On Relationship, and it was really profound for me. Probably because I have a Libra moon. It helped bring, you know, this objectivity to me. But okay, let's dive into this Gemini new moon. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to tie into this new moon. I'm going to just get going and then I'll tie them in. That's what I'm going to do. So, okay, we know that this new moon is at 26 degrees and 43 minutes of Gemini. So it therefore is ruled by Mercury, who is also in Gemini. It is really interesting to, you know, we've covered some of the core archetypes of Gemini, but one of them that I really like to think about, especially with this new moon and it being a new moon, so we're starting a brand new cycle. We're wanting some type of integration on an emotional level, and it's dealing with the sun. So it's a creative expression, which is really amped up with Venus and Mars both being in Leo as well, and the sun ruling that. But within Gemini is where we can relearn something, recontextualize, reformulate. It's, you know, a good Jeffrey Wolf Green teaching is he's talked about it like concentric circles. And I feel like that's something that you can really build off of or upon. So during this full new moon, Pluto is retrograde and has now entered the sign of Capricorn. So we know that there is a review of some sort in order to resolve. And depending on the person or the energetics where this happens in someone's chart, this can show up as revisiting old dynamics so that we can reflect upon them. And that way we can come into a new type of awareness or a direct experience, Pluto, with something that we need to reflect on in order to gain Capricornian wisdom about. This Pluto is still square the south node and the north node, with the south node being the resolution. So we're still wanting to really utilize and look at that south node that rules Pluto and getting to the bottom of these types of dynamics that revolve around, you know, being your own natural authority, asking and answering your own questions. With Pluto being ruled by Saturn and Pisces, there's this need to really look at artificial and man-made structures and to dissolve them at this point in time. Pluto is in conjunct this new moon, so there is a readjustment process going on around our mental faculties revolving around these dynamics. So that's why I brought in this like recontextualizing, reformulating. So if we are utilizing Pluto's, you know, ruler Saturn, we're wanting to look at any type of conditioning that's man-made and artificial that's really not in resonance with us, and to get to the bottom of it by pulling in that south node. And the readjustment can happen as we do that work. We get to reformulate and recontextualize. So Mercury, the ruler of this new moon, is square Pluto's ruler Saturn. So this just really is this call to action to be investigative, to be curious about what it is we're supposed to be relearning or dissolving and understanding and coming into an awareness about that may be something that has been artificial in our lives. It can also be looking at our ideals revolving around things. And through utilizing all of this, Neptune, which is Saturn's ruler, is in a crescent phase sextile to Pluto, so we can really integrate these lessons that we're all working on revolving around these themes. You know, Uranus is still in Taurus, so there's still this transformative process on our inner relationship to self that is going down. And Venus is the ruler of this Uranus, and she is in Leo. And with Venus being in Leo, this is the need to, it's fire energy. There's this need to really express the masculine and feminine energies of going after what it is that our heart is desiring. And really, we've all been learning about what our values are. And so as we've been learning about what our values are, we can have a creative actualization come into place by integrating these and utilizing the ruler of Venus, which is the sun and Gemini. So recontextualizing, relearning, and creatively expressing ourselves in a new way that is more in alignment with ourselves, as opposed to more artificial kind of man-made themes. And you know, Mercury is also in a crescent phase sextile to this Venus, which really amps up and doubles down on this energy that I'm talking about. And something that people don't oftentimes talk about within Leo is that there needs to be a self-focus in order to creatively actualize before you can go out and give it to the world, right? And then move into the Aquarian energy.
Yeah.
But it's about really going after what it is that your heart is desiring, from understanding the new needs and the new values. And within Leo, oftentimes there's this misconception that creative actualization just has to deal with the arts. But if we look at this Venus being ruled by the sun in Gemini, this is really about the need to creatively express oneself in some type of way in order to heal, in order to feel, in order to take what we've been learning and to have this self-focus of an integration. That's also when you're looking at the crescent phase sextile between the moon's ruler and this Venus that is ruled by the sun. There's an ease of integration that can happen if we choose to really work on these dynamics. And also, this new moon is square Neptune. So there's this call to act on really tapping into values that are more timeless in nature. If we are wanting to really look and be our own authority and ask and answer our own questions with Pluto and Capricorn, and Saturn has the ruler of Neptune, and we're wanting to dissolve man-made structures in order to creatively actualize on a deeper, more authentic level, then we need to pull in more timeless principles. And this also means that whenever we're wanting to creatively actualize, we can have help from things that maybe we, you know, aren't as tangible. It's more of the Piscean realm. And then we also have Mars trining Chiron, and Chiron is ruled by this Mars. So there can be a lot coming up around needing self-leadership, which also kind of goes with this Capricornian need to be our own natural authority. So there can be wounds that come up around these dynamics that the soul is wanting and desiring Mars, the ruler of that, wanting to creatively actualize with. And I thought that this was really beautiful, is that Lilith is in conjunct this Chiron, and Lilith is in the sign of Virgo right now. And so if Lilith is in conjunct this Chiron, there is a need to really, Chiron is where we can come into a deeper awareness about where we've been hurt or wounded. And that's what really helps change our mindset on something. Chiron, you can't really ever get rid of the wound. It's just, it's there. We're able to transform our awareness around it. And with Lilith in conjunct Chiron, there's this need to really tap into our center of taking things one step at a time in order to creatively actualize if Chiron is ruled by this Mars. And it made me actually think of, in Greek mythology, there are 9 muses. So they're the goddesses. And the stories are that if you want to get struck by the muse and to creatively actualize, all you have to do is to take action. So it's like this Lilith in Virgo putting one foot in front of the other. So as you do that, the muse in Greek mythology understands that you're wanting to creatively actualize, and she'll come and she'll spark something within you so that you can. And so this new moon really symbolizes and reflects to me the need to be courageous, Mars and Leo, to go after what our heart is desiring and for it to be authentic, with Jupiter also being ruled by Venus and Leo and conjunct the North Node. We're wanting to expand upon how we're learning, how we're wanting to use creative expression to self-actualize right now by taking in more timeless principles and natural laws, because we're revealing on a collective level, you know, a more natural sense. That's what's wanting to happen and wanting to occur right now. And for creative expression and creative actualization to happen, the best magic happens when you're being authentic and you're understanding who you are. And as you're learning and you're creatively expressing with all of the sextile energy in this chart, there's this compare and contrast. It's the counterpoint of action. Through that, we also get to pull in Lilith and Virgo and learn more. It's like being an apprentice of creative actualization right now. Like, what feels good? How is this going to show up in my life? Going back to like the Greek mythology and the muses, you don't know which 9 of those is going to show up. You know, one of them is for astrology. One of them is for poetry. There's all of these. One of them is for tapping into your emotional body and transforming traumatic experiences. And these are the areas where we can have this creative actualization come into place. And I also wanted to say that Uranus is trine Pluto. So as we do this, this helps us continue to liberate from the old structures of our reality that are no longer in resonance with us. And creative actualization and using this new moon of creative expression is really this gateway right now. And so it is about putting one foot in front of the other for this to happen.
Yeah, that's very well explained, Jordyn. And one of the key words that jump out to me from everything you've just shared is be honest with yourself. You know, it's that sun and moon in Gemini conjunct, you know, it is about that honesty. And are you voicing your truth? Are you living your truth? And that's all the archetypes you've mentioned. And that Uranus trine Pluto that you've just mentioned as well. You're liberating yourself from those old patterns that don't work, that haven't worked. And this is like the final, not the final chance, but you know, Pluto going back into Capricorn is that last stint before it goes into Aquarius next year. So it's like we're given a 6-month window to really work, go into the deep assess and just bring up what needs to be released. And it is, like you said, your creative self-actualization and being honest and expressing your truth.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Rob, because Venus is about to go retrograde. So we're going to have these 3 passes of being able, this is just like the starting of this, like taking all of this information and this data we've been collecting as a way to formulate creative expression and then utilizing that Jupiter and expanding upon it. And with Uranus trining Pluto, there's a lot of guidance and wisdom there for us to have objectivity as we reflect on prior dynamics that can spark a creative jolt within us. It's like what once was our poison now becomes our potion, is kind of this feel for this that can spark a creative sense within. And it's, you know, on this day, Saturn is going to be stationed. So there's something that could really come up to the forefront that could have a profound effect on us during this period of Venus being in Leo. It's really about, we're being able to heal a lot right now. And one of the ways that we do get to heal, and like, you know, the divine and astrology is reflecting to us, is creative expression and creative actualization in whatever way is unique for yourself. It doesn't have to be the arts. It can be, it's a plethora of things, you know? And so I just thought whenever I was looking at Lilith and in conjunct that Chiron with it, you know, Lilith is ruled by this Mercury, Chiron is ruled by that Mars and Leo. It just was very much, it made me think of that story of the muse. Like, as long as you put one foot in front of the other, the muse can strike. And you know, so
well, it's that whole thing to do with Mercury. It's fast, it's quick, you know, it suddenly pop up, and you could be doing something, a different activity, then you get certain insight. It's
Well,
just
and Pallas is conjunct
yeah.
that Mars too right now. So it's like it punches up this energy of like creative from something that we were really uncomfortable with in the past. Now something really beautiful can spark from it, especially Jupiter being on the North Node. But you got to let the past go. Like, as far as not resist it, not go through the emotional dynamics, but to change the awareness around it.
Jordyn, we could do a 1 hour talk on just
I
this
know.
one.
One thing I wanted to share that made me to draw upon what you were sharing, Jordyn and Rav, and in terms of a book, it made me think of organic spirituality. That sometimes we just need that perspective change, or we just need things recontextualized in a way to where we can relate, seeing that Taurus, Jupiter, to where it feels honest and organic for us to help us shift from that more patriarchal or conditioned or man-made lens to a lens where we can connect and then actualize the God spark, or actualize that spark that's been calling to us in whatever form. And it really speaks to the natural principle of unity and diversity. We're all going to have different gateways, different ways that are authentic for us to do that, and not to undermine Venus or Lilith being in Virgo, whatever our natural way is. And I found the beauty in her book was that she really shifted it from this real austere and very Saturnian view of how she had been trained, or how she had taken in information about spirituality, and made it this really simple everyday process to where she was nurturing that within herself every day. And it could be something as simple as cleaning the bathtub. And it became
Yes.
a very spiritual experience somehow. And it just really hit home because that's what had been going on in my head. And having it communicated in a way to where I could make that switch really helped me relate in a different way. So I can also see the transit speaking to that, to where if we switch that lens, or if we switch that viewpoint in a way to where we can then relate to it from a natural standpoint, of those processes you were talking about will naturally be facilitated.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think with Mars moving into Virgo soon, like that's just going to help this whole process with people who are wanting to consciously work with this. And it doubles down on what you're talking about, even with that book, you know?
Yeah.
That was a great example, Deva. Thank you.
Well, it was drawing upon what you guys said. Mercury
it?
in action.
Yeah.
What was the name of the book again?
Organic spirituality.
Okay, awesome. I'll put all of these references in the description of the video too.
I guess it's just remembering that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And there's your Saturn in Pisces trying to kind of re-emphasize that point at this particular time, especially. Right, so moving on. Jordyn, I know it feels like it's the Jordyn show right now.
It's okay. We'll
We
get
have
through this.
Yes, we have the herb of the month, if you want to take this one.
Yes. Okay. We are doing Mullein, or Verploegen thapsus. It is ruled by Mercury and co-ruled by Jupiter, and that is through Agrippa. Culpepper likes to say that Mullein is ruled by Saturn. I chose more of the Agrippa way just because Mercury being the throat chakra, it really kind of pulls in. Also, you'll see what I'm talking about here in a second whenever I start talking about the uses of Mercury, of Mullein. So common uses are for asthma, the cough, common colds, bronchitis, COPD. It's because it's an expectorant, a demulcent, which is also, I kind of reiterated this by saying anti-inflammatory. It's great for allergies. It's an antiviral and an antibacterial. You can use this as a poultice if you have hemorrhoids because it's anti-inflammatory, so it helps with that. This is something that you can smoke, which sounds counterproductive or counterintuitive if you're having a lot of congestion within your lungs, because it helps, it's an expectorant, it helps it come out. It also thins out your phlegm, and it is traditionally, it was used by the Roman soldiers. They used it to light torches by sticking the plant in tallow, and it would light the path for them on their journeys, which is very much a Gemini kind of thing. It also was used by the indigenous cultures to keep their feet warm by putting it in their moccasins. It helped insulate their moccasins during cold winters to help with that. It is great for protection, divination, courage, love, and preventing nightmares and the metaphysical uses. I even know with my oldest child, whenever they would get nightmares when they were younger, we would wrap this in like a red cord for love, and we would stick it above their bed, and it did. It helped with them and their nightmares. It's also really good in capsule form as an extract, an oil, and a lot of people love using it as a tea. This was found originally in Eurasia, so Europe can also be found now in North Africa, Asia, Australia, and America because of being imported over time. And I'm trying to think. The warnings are that it can create a skin rash and it may not be safe for pregnant or breastfeeding people. I also personally, in the realm of allergies, this is amazing for allergies. I use this as a tea. I get it. We have wild mullein here in Oklahoma. I will dry that out and I will grind it down and use it as a tea. And I put local honey in it because the bees here pollinate. The pollination that they use really helps with the allergies that are here. So whoever is having allergies, that's a really great use in a more natural way. Sorry, my throat got dry. It's all this talking. It's a really great way to help combat allergies in a natural way without having to use steroids. So, yeah, that's my spiel on mullein.
I think you need to grab a mullein tea right now, no?
I know, right? Throat shock right here.
Yeah, thank you for that. So just moving on to our signature of the month. We've got Sir Paul McCartney, as we call him in the UK, because he has received a knighthood from the Queen. So in EA, it's very much about observation and correlation. So we're just going to give you a quick bio of his life, and then we'll dive into his chart. So Paul McCartney, English singer, songwriter, and musician. He holds the record of being the most successful musician and composer in pop music history. His songwriting partnership alongside John Lennon remains the most successful in history to date. He's written and co-written a record 32 songs, which have topped the Billboard Hot 100 in America to the year 2009. And the honors that he's received in his lifetime to date include 2 inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, one as a member of the Beatles in 1988 and as a solo artist in 1999. He has an Academy Award, he has a Primetime Emmy, he has 18 Grammy Awards. He received an MBA in 1965, which is the member of the Order of the British Empire, and a knighthood in 1997. Hence, we refer to him as Sir Paul McCartney. And as of 2022, at the age of 80, he performed and was the headline act for the Glastonbury Festival in England, making him the oldest headliner in the festival's 50-year history. So he created another record there. And in April this year, he was listed as one of the wealthiest musicians in the world with an estimated fortune of $1.2 billion. If we look at his early childhood environment, it's a complete contrast to where he is right now. So he was born in a city in England called Liverpool, in a working class family. His father was in the cotton trade and his mother was a midwife. His childhood home in Liverpool was actually bought by the National Trust. And the National Trust in the UK is an organisation that preserves places of historic interest and of natural beauty. So this was purchased by them in 1995, and it's since become a popular tourist destination for all Beatles fans. In 1953, he met George Harrison at the Liverpool Institute where he studied. He lost his mother in 1956 to breast cancer. She was known to be a heavy smoker and had been suffering from breast cancer for a while. He was 15 years old. His father was a key musician himself, and he's the one that encouraged Paul and his brother to explore the musical, to be musical. He even bought Paul a trumpet following the death of his mother. Paul actually went on to exchange that trumpet for an acoustic guitar. And it's been reported that he did take music lessons when he was young, but he actually preferred to learn by ear. And he also went on to learn how to play the piano himself. He met John Lennon in 1957, and they would go on to have quite a close bond, because John Lennon in 1958 also lost his mother. So they'd go on to become very good friends. They wrote music together and performed together. He also went on to persuade John Lennon to allow George Harrison, who was a friend of Paul McCartney's, to join the band as the lead guitarist in 1958. And that's when the Beatles were formed in 1960. So you had Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. So the Beatles are regarded as one of the most influential bands of all time. They've received numerous awards during their career and even post their breakup. Officially, they broke up in 1970, but it was later revealed that John Lennon had left the group in September 1969, and it was Paul McCartney who made the announcement when he released his album in 1970. And it was reported that the breakup occurred for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was the death of their manager, Brian Epstein, in 1967. Potentially John Lennon's drug use and his relationship with Yoko Ono was another reason. And also the band's resentment of Paul McCartney trying to dominate the band, it was reported. And they actually ended up experiencing legal battles post the band breaking up, and the band was formally dissolved on December the 29th, 1974. So John Lennon, I'm about to move on to the wrong Beatles player here. Paul McCartney actually went on to have a solo career, as we know. He released the solo music for the first time in 1967, but his first album was released in 1970 called McCartney. He went on to form the band Wings with his wife at the time, Linda McCartney. And so they ended up touring the world with their band as well, and he did collaborations with other artists in his solo career. In terms of his personal life, so he was engaged to a British actress called Jane Asher between 1963 to 1967. They broke up when she caught him cheating. He then went to meet his future wife, Linda McCartney, in 1967. They married in 1969. And in that year, he actually adopted Heather's daughter, Linda's daughter, Heather, earlier in 1969, and then had his own daughter with Linda McCartney in August 1969. They would go on to have another daughter, Stella McCartney, born in 1971, and a son, James, born in 1977. But after 29 years of marriage, in 1998, Linda McCartney also died from breast cancer. He went on to marry Heather Mills a few years later in 2002, and they had a daughter in 2003. Heather at the time was 25 years his junior. They ended up divorced in 2008 after 6 years of marriage, and he married his third wife, Nancy Chevelle, in 2011. And just a bit of news in terms of what's happening with Paul McCartney at this time. He's got a new book that's been released in a couple of days called 1964 Eyes of the Storm. It's to do with photography of his time with the Beatles in 1964. And I also read just this morning today that they may possibly be releasing a song that the Beatles had created back in the day that never got released. And that was just a bit of news I Googled this morning. So Paul McCartney is still very much in the media. He's still working. He's still, expressing his creative side. So looking into his birth chart, we're going to start off with the usual EA perspective, which is always from Pluto, which symbolizes the journey of the soul. And I'm going to ask David to start us off with his natal Pluto.
Yeah, and from what we talked about prior to a meeting today, that we all agree he's in the third stage individuated.
Yeah.
Okay. So relative to third stage individuated, and from that wonderful background that you shared, Rav, seeing that Pluto is in the 11th house, the underlying intention is to decondition and to liberate from all influences that are affecting or contributing to the self-actualization process. That can be groups, that can be social bonds, that can be any influence that the soul intends to first objectify and then liberate from. And the analogy that really helped me understand Pluto in the 11th in a general sense is thinking of it as all the ingredients of a pie. And if you change that one ingredient, you change a cherry pie to a strawberry pie. So just by changing one thing, you change the whole shebang. And so, from what you shared in terms of disconnecting from social groups that no matter how much popularity, seeing the Leo energy that they got, they just didn't feel right for him, or it felt like that the underlying need to disconnect or to liberate from social ties that had outrun their natural course. And that then allowed him to step into the polarity point of the fifth house being in Aquarius, and to take charge of creative energies that were unique to him and that would help him continue to decondition from situations that may have felt stuck or fixed. And in my view, that's one aspect of the 11th house that's always important to keep in mind. It's that it's a fixed energy, and that's why it requires a ability to step outside of it first in order to break that fixity and to step into the creative energies of the fifth house. So it could be kind of toying around with what you were saying, that even though in this incredible band, he may have been having ideas that were unique to himself or that really tuned into his own authentic creativity in a way that wasn't facilitated being in the group dynamic he was in, and then going solo. So that's the starting point of what I can see as being Pluto and its polarity point.
Yeah, it's interesting because with this Pluto being in Leo, that ruler is that sun in Gemini in the 10th house, right at the MC. And so it's sort of like he was born to be in the spotlight, he was born with the gift of communication. We know he's written so many songs, the awards he's won, the amount of, being the record holder for the number of songs he has written and co-written. So that's that mercurial side coming through. And with that Mercury retrograde conjuncting his sun, though it's in the 9th house, it's like he has that ability to link into his intuitive side, knowing what songs were coming through intuitively. So I believe he learned to play music fast, like we read, and he learned through ear. He rather learned through hearing it rather than being told how to learn. And there's your Mercury retrograde. You can't tell a Mercury retrograde what to do, and what to learn. They intuitively will, because they're throwing back onto themselves. So they will intuitively pick up what they need to pick up. And that's exactly how he seems to have written his songs and done his music. That whole rumor that one of the reasons they broke up was because of his, trying to take charge of the band. But you can see the leadership quality that Paul McCartney has. So whether that's true or not, he was born to be a leader, and in a way it was his kind of assertiveness that brought Beatles into the forefront, I feel and I believe. Yeah. Jordyn, you
Right.
will. Yeah,
Well,
Jordyn.
too, just one thing to add too to
Yeah.
what you said, sorry, is seeing that evolutionary state, that from what you were saying too, it may have touched upon a theme of in other lifetimes trying to tap into that ability and having messages that may have been too radical or too outside the mainstream to really be heard. And then this lifetime may have been a repetition, seeing that Mercury retrograde of how best to communicate this, seeing that the South Node is in the 6th in Pisces, North Node is in Virgo in the 12th, Saturn squaring those nodes. So it's like a way of doing it in a way to where he could fully express what may have not been able to be expressed or received prior to the life.
Yeah.
Would that make sense? Or
Yeah. Well, actually, on that note, Deva, if you look at a South Node in Pisces in the 6th house, and he has Saturn squaring the nodes, the ruler of that is that Neptune at 27 degrees of Virgo, which is right on his ascendant. Would you, I feel like in the past that he's been persecuted maybe for the creative path that he's maybe chosen. And he has a natural sensitivity. So I feel like in this lifetime, the band being with others was essential before he stepped into his own individuality, his own kind of self-creative purpose. So does that make sense?
Right, it's like a catalyst for
Yeah.
this to come to the forefront. Yeah, that would make sense in my
Yeah.
view. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a timing to do with that in terms of how he met. I know we're going to talk about it a bit later, how it was all a little bit fated, how he met George Harrison and even John Lennon, his father introducing him to the music, all those connectedness going on. Yeah, so I was just going to ask Jordyn, because I know you were looking at the Uranus in Gemini, right? You were going to explore that side of
Saturn, Uranus, yeah.
Saturn, Uranus, yeah.
Yeah, so I found, first of all, while I was doing research on him, there were so many archetypes that reflected this archetype. So he was really a front runner of the London avant-garde. That's Uranus and in the ninth house right there. He spearheaded the incorporation of experimental aesthetic into music. This is also dealing with this Uranian energy, and it also ties in his south node of Neptune in the fifth house being ruled by that Uranus. He was a de facto leader in the group, and one of the things that really helped with the whole spearheading of the experimental aesthetics is that he brought film into his music. Even with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, this is that expression of Uranus, and also being the ruler of that south node of Neptune in the fifth house, him bringing these qualities that he's learned on some capacity of into this lifetime as a way to self-actualize in this lifetime. Like you said, he learned by ear, which I also think is a Uranian Gemini and the ninth house quality, because it is so right brain and it ties in that Mercury retrograde. I also think it's really interesting because whenever I've seen like Uranus tied in with Jupiter or Sag or in a ninth house, there's always like this indie music or indie, like if it was a comedian, they'll oftentimes have like Jupiter, Uranus, and they're like indie and they get in the back door, right? And so Uranus here in the ninth house is very much kind of this indie feel before they broke out big time, as they were moving towards this. This also speaks to, this is a soul who's in the third stage of individuation. There's a lot of Uranian energy within this chart, but one of the things that he said really was prolific in him and music was the travels and the journeys that he went on that helped him come to an awareness about spirituality and different cosmological and philosophical viewpoints that he was able to put into the creative aesthetic of his music through film, through art. And so this is just kind of this repeating signature of, the south node of Neptune being ruled by that Uranus, but the Saturn part is him putting it into structural form. If he stayed kind of in the south node Neptune realms, like it wouldn't go. And he also said that his dad was someone who was a really big influence on him musically because of the type of music his dad listened to, which was jazz. And that's ultimately what got him to start to learn to play different instruments by ear. So you can tell that these are things that he's done in a prior lifetime. I feel like with Uranus, you kind of have this genius quality, which can be like these childhood geniuses. And this is reflected also in like Pluto in the 11th house in Leo and Uranus Gemini as well. So the instruments he played, I also think are fabulous because it's all very Gemini. So keyboards, guitars, drums, obviously the bass, but his writing was really what set him apart. And I feel like that is a very much Uranus, Saturn in the ninth house in Gemini really ties in Mercury being retrograde in that ninth house as well. The right brain, having it just come in, seeing all of the parts, and then to put it and like it's genius, Uranus, and then having to put it into structural form, Saturn, through writing lyrics. So it's like going from the right brain, the non-linear, to having to actualize this, you have to write it down. And so I thought that that was a really cool expression of this, you know, Saturn Uranus, but it also speaks to relearning what his values and principles were by liberating from, you know, the old. You can see that in relearning about it with his North Node of Venus and Gemini conjunct that Mercury retrograde, which is the ruler of that Saturn and Uranus in the 9th house. And a lot of that came through by him going on these journeys that were like spiritual. I'm pretty sure the Beatles were like known and looked at as like really weird for going to the east and stuff. And I feel like that's also Neptune on his ascendant being ruled by that Mercury. So it just, there's tons of repeating signatures in this chart, I feel like. So
yeah. It's interesting as well because he was never going to write superficial stuff. You know, his third house, naturally Gemini, third house, is ruled by Scorpio, you know, and that is his Pluto in the 11th house. So he was going to write music that was revolutionary, different, you know, attracting a different I'm going to say crowd, but they ended up being one of, you know, the best bands in the world. And so look at the power that created when he actually went, just explored his natural authenticity. You know, it's that Mercury in Gemini, which is retrograde, like you mentioned, is squaring that Neptune. But, you know, he once actually said, if I want to say anything, I write a song. I think people who create and write it, actually, it does flow. It just flows into their head, into their hand, and they write it down. You know, that whole Gemini, you know, that intuitive side, like in a way, automatic writing, you know, that Neptune on that cusp, squaring that Mercury is Mercury retrograde as well. So that I feel like he had a natural psychic ability of automatic writing, whether he would admit to that or not. That's what brought that music forward in those words in those songs that he's written.
I also feel like this is someone who, I forget what it's called. I see this a lot in kind of these like artist genius kind of realms, is, God, what is it called whenever you can like see sounds or like smell, you know, like this is like that vibe, I feel like. And I think that that's why it pulls in the film and the whole orchestrating, how everything, the creative aesthetic of everything. It's like as he, you know, was having these downloads of music come into him, this is this very Uranian kind of, you know, Neptune thing going on. You know, he would have visuals about it. He could see what he wanted it to look like. And he was the creative impetus for the Beatles. They said that that's why, like, they had issues, is because, you know, too many chiefs, not enough Indians, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know?
I know we're going to move on and look at some transits, but Sue, did you want to add anything? Because I know you are a Beatles fan.
I am a Beatles fan, and I'm going to add a little bit of kind of a different flavor to what we're talking about. I have been given permission to read from an awesome book called The Spiritual Dimension of the Beatles by Eric Meyers, and he's got the great graphic of them, and there's the title. And his interpretation of kind of goes along with what you all are saying. So here's quoting from two sections when John and Paul meet and Mary McCartney's death. So astrologically, eclipses signal major spiritual passages, turning points that often have breakdown and or breakthrough meaning. Eclipses are notable evolutionary markers until the next ones come along. On June 8, 1956, there was a significant solar eclipse hitting Paul's chart. in the sign of Gemini, which involves communications. Mary's death occurred during the passage initiated by the event. As Paul is a Gemini sun, this eclipse profoundly energized his chart in terms of communications. It was exact on his Mercury.
Oh, wow.
When Mary died, mothering energy, Ceres, in Paul's astrology was understandably emphasized, a transition from ending to a new beginning. Mary McCartney loved her son dearly, a timeless form of sacred love. Though her death was undoubtedly tragic and profoundly devastating, the astrology conveys another dimension of meaning. Paul's central soul intention is the transformation of grief into performance, to not only inspire and bring people together, but to deliver a message from beyond. Paul and Mary have an incredibly profound spiritual connection with some of the most striking astrology in this entire book. The working hypothesis is her soul had the willingness and wisdom to play a catalyzing role in Paul's spiritual drama. She may have been supporting his development from both sides of the boundary of death. It is a beautiful form of selfless, soulful love. So after Mary's death, Paul channeled his emotions into, this is continuing from the section on John and Paul meet. Paul channeled his emotion into musical development. He spent his time learning the guitar and became proficient quickly. As mentioned earlier, he has likely been a musician, entertainer in prior lives, but unable to fully put it forth in the world. In the present incarnation, his innate musical talent developed easily, like tying his shoes. The next solar eclipse was on December 2nd, 1956, at 10 degrees Sagittarius on the eventual Beatles ascendant. On the spiritual level, the wheels were in motion. The following summer, shortly after turning 15, Paul went to see a local musical gig. It was an event that would ultimately change the trajectory of Western culture. John's childhood friend, Ivan Vaughn, introduced him to Paul as he knew them both. The idea of destiny can be a tricky concept for the personality to grasp. Instead of predetermination, another way to see destiny is the realization of soul intentions. There are 360 degrees in a circle, the same as the zodiac. When John and Paul were first in the presence of each other on 7/6/1957, the moon was at the very same degree, 10 degrees Scorpio, as they have in their relationship chart. A striking synchronicity. Additionally, the moon was conjunct the nodal axis, which is the signature of spiritual destiny. The astrology at this moment matched the John-Paul dynamic, which specifically involved writing about maternal death issues for emotional resolution. By so doing, they could claim visibility, even celebrity, to catalyze collective emotional processes and healing. So, looking at these transits, and the first thing that jumped out to me was this series right here. Yeah. Exactly conjunct his Mercury. Let's see. It kind of spoke to this feeling of their shared grief. John had also lost his mother at an early age, so there was that.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because if you look at this transiting Saturn retrograde, it's ruled by his Jupiter in the 10th house in Cancer. So it's almost like they were part of the same family system before and might have experienced a loss of a mother that really, altered, and they're meeting up in this lifetime as a way to reclaim or to heal that wound.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
you've also got that Sirius that you mentioned. It's actually squaring his progressed moon, which was 19 degrees Pisces in the 6th house, the
Right.
second middle ring. Do you see that? So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, right.
you know, the moon going to the 3rd house to do with work and
Right there.
service.
Yeah.
Yeah. So emphasizing the mother's energy. Pisces can be the, you know, the other side, the spiritual realm. So literally, like you said, working alongside his mom, supporting him on from the other side, not just, you know, in this incarnation.
Yeah. And his progressed Mercury was, well, his Mercury was retrograde when he was born, so and then it turned direct, I think, 6 days after he was born. So by progression, it would have been at age 6.
Yeah.
At 17 degrees and 1 minute of Gemini. So it didn't, it didn't move very much further before it turned direct, within a couple of degrees of natal Mercury. And
I'm
then,
wondering if they came together also with the transits happening to his 11th house, and then Chiron in Aquarius transiting his 5th house being ruled by his Uranus, if it was about helping each other bring objectivity to each other through the experience of loss.
very, very quite conceivably possible. Yes, I would concur on that. Let's see. Okay, so then the next thing I noticed was he was having a Mars return.
Yeah.
Which to me, this happened. This is a kind of a recurring theme in in the progressions that I chose. Not on that basis, but and he's having one now. So at this point, it was also with transiting Saturn and Uranus. So that kind of goes along with what you're saying, Jordyn. And then he's also got all of this Leo and all of this progressed Leo, so it just kind of re-emphasizing the Leo 5th house creative self-actualization themes.
That transiting Chiron's also conjunct his, it's not on here, but it's that south node of Neptune in Aquarius in his 5th house as well. So it just kind of really pulls in the experience of re-experiencing this.
Yeah, I was going to say bringing the past into the present. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a way to utilize for creative expression and to connect. So this is also going back to like Pluto being in Leo in the 11th house in his stage of evolution. Oftentimes, in that stage, it's because we have something to bring to the collective in a way that helps them evolve or transforms, all the Aquarian kind of words. And so I feel like with his mom and with John's mom both dying and then them meeting and it being fated, this is part of their individuation journey in the 3rd stage of, those prior wounds of taking them in as a way to creatively actualize in a very, 3rd stage individuated way. Wouldn't you guys say?
Yeah. But even when you look at the outer ring, which is the formation of the Beatles, the transits at the time, you've got the sun at 14 degrees Cancer and the moon at 12 degrees Scorpio. So you've got a trine going on there. So the blending of the Scorpion energies and the deep information coming through, and you've got Cancer being the emotional building, the coming forward. So it's that all that water that's going on to do with the Piscean energies, kind of re-emphasizing how this group, the message and the music that was going to come forward, because this kind of would have been like their birth chart of the Beatles, is all to do with inner growth, soul development, inner growth, and their songs would have meanings for years to come, and to this day, you know, they're still making money off their music to this day.
Absolutely.
Oh, and those chirons are in an opposition as well for the transits, and then his natal. I think this is fascinating. I love looking at transits.
I do too. It just, you know, and it's always, but wait, there's more. But
Yeah.
wait, there's more. Okay, but wait, there's more. So then the next thing that I noticed was that his progressed Saturn and Venus were getting very close to a conjunction up here, and his Venus, you know, was progressed to just past his natal Saturn, and then moving on to his progress. They would meet, you know, probably, I would say, within the next year, probably.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
all that traveling they ended up doing.
Yes, yes, which is what the book is about, that he's releasing in the next couple of days. It's pictures of that first couple of years when they were traveling all around. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, look at the timing of that, just coming all back around in a way. But
yeah,
that's
at another Mars return.
Yes.
Yeah. And then of course, then let's see, then of course here we have transiting Jupiter conjunct his ascendant and Neptune. And you know,
the physical growth they were going to go through.
Exactly, the opportunity for, you know, immense expansion.
Yeah.
Coming in. And then let's see, one other one was the transiting Sun and Mercury were at new phase in Cancer, you know, with, you know, just having gone over his progressed Sun, just again, you know, just shows the blending of family with career. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And then a little more from Eric's book about the release of Please Please Me, which was on March 22nd, 1963. Shown here, I didn't explain this before, but the transits on the outside, progressions in the middle, and natal on the inside. So Please Please Me. The astrology for the album release reveals a bold declaration of ambition, an exuberant new beginning. It features a blend of assertion with imagination, edginess, and inspiration. The group's core spiritual work, their karmic destiny, was being set off by the planets of communication, Mercury, and craftsmanship, Vesta. It's the realization of the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership and activation of the band's collective contribution. There was immensely supportive flow into the cultural mainstream with maximal activation of the Beatles' signature, which is what he refers to as the, in their composite chart, they have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini. So he calls it the Beatles' signature. It gets activated periodically throughout their rise, meteoric rise. The potential was an explosion into widespread acclaim. Youthful expression of fiery masculine passion was the driving force. As is the case in much of Beatles astrology, the maternal death issue lurks underneath. Transiting Ceres conjunct Pluto and Uranus. So let's start with that.
Yeah, it falls on his north node.
And Ceres is bang on his north node, the transiting Ceres retrograde, and his natal north node. He's also had Mars return again.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
It seems like each one of these ones that I chose, except for one, he had a Mars return.
I have a question, Deva, for you, actually. Do you think that with his creative expression of being able to write these songs, that was more of a way for him to heal from prior trauma? That was an act of his individuation in the third stage?
Interesting.
Very much. And seeing that at the time, looks like Pluto is close to that North Node in the 12th house. That by doing that, that's a culmination or fruition of a way of he'd been trying to heal himself, most likely for many lifetimes, coming to fruition or culmination right at the time that the album came out. And that way of being able to really tap into the energy of the third stage individuated, seeing how it just spread like wildfire.
And then with that transiting South Node in Capricorn being ruled by his Saturn, we had talked about earlier how maybe it was hard for him to kind of put things into structural form in prior lifetimes, like being thwarted or it wasn't accepted. Do you think that South Node transit kind of firing up that Saturn is part of that piece? Well, his own natal Saturn.
Very much like something becoming unblocked, if I'm hearing you right.
Yes.
Something becoming unblocked, absolutely. And that coming through, in my point of view, this meeting up with somebody who he most likely held as mutual respect or taking in as much of his authority as John his, and it creating this coming together in a way that created that fuel. Perhaps like seeing that Mars energy that you were speaking of, Sue, that becoming a catalyst of like putting a fuel in the engine or putting a fuel in the car for this really to be given birth to or to take off.
They became each other's tribe.
Yeah, seeing the 11th house, and that
Yeah.
it was like that combination was just the fuel that it needed for it to progress in the way that it did.
Yeah, and to your point, the Saturn is also, opposite his Leo moon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And
so like a throwing off of older authorities or older structures.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting one also, ladies, is if you look at the Neptune retrograde in Scorpio, the transit, it's building up to an opposition to his natal Venus in the 8th house in Taurus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you've got that 2nd and 8th house dynamic, his inner self-worth, linking into the power and structure that he has in literally, Neptune being the higher octave of Venus. So, that kind of spiritualness coming through, him being able to express that through the Beatles in the first instance before he goes on to do his solo stuff.
I also think that can be, especially like second house Venus. We talk about in EA how it's about our own natural resources, like the things that we have at hand. And so I think because he has such a prominent Neptune playing into all of this in his own natal chart, like this was the time to take the Neptunian stuff he had already learned, apply it to the Venusian stuff, kind of like you were saying, in a metamorphic way, as a way to also play a part in the transformative experience of putting these things into like a concrete structure instead of just how I want to say this. Do you guys get what I'm saying?
It's like sorry to butt in, but it's like in the second house, it's a psychology of listening. It's like he was truly listening to his soul. The music that wanted to come through, Neptune, Scorpio linking to the soul, the deeper recess of that. And so he had the ability to literally tune in. And that transit, I think, was even more emphasized or was building up to that. So that was coming through into the world, what he wanted to share, the songs he'd written, the music that they created. So it's like what you've all mentioned, what he couldn't fulfill in a previous incarnation, where society or whatever kind of dictated what he could and couldn't express. Now there was an opportunity for him to be able to put that out to the world without the fear of judgment.
And his progressed moon, but wait, there's more. His progressed moon is coming to a conjunction. I mean, his progressed Mars is coming to a conjunction of his moon, which rules the 11th house. And interestingly, Eric Call refers to the 11th house as the world stage.
Okay.
So it's bringing this all out to the world stage. One other thing, there's one other thing at least, is his progressed Mercury has now come to his sun.
Yeah.
In the 10th house.
Yeah.
Which, talking about, the expression and, just one more.
Yeah. It just shows the strong Gemini energy in his chart, like how
Really?
strong it really is. Once you dive into all these signatures, look at the progressions and transits, you can actually see more of a picture of exactly what's going on with that Gemini energy.
Yes.
Oh,
And
right, exactly. And seeing that, of course, there's always more. Seeing how being in a band like the Beatles and that Saturn square the nodes with these transits, it may have been a way, let's say if he was in other lifetimes classically trained or a musician for many lifetimes and that had been his way of expressing or whatnot, connecting with the energy of the Beatles as a group, seeing that 11th house, and it like gave it another form, another structure to really tap into his most organic way of doing it. So his like you say, it was like tying his shoes because of what he'd done in other lifetimes, but having this reformed in a way to where it became something very unconventional. Like the classically trained becomes unfettered or completely unrestricted in how they express themselves.
Dave,
I always,
I've just had an image of the bard, a storyteller in the past, traveling through different cities and stuff. I just had an image of that, of him in a past lifetime, possibly.
I also think something that I don't know if it's like a mantra or a euphemism or something that I always think of with the Leo Aquarius axis is like, if one wins, we all win. Instead of it being like, as opposed to like me or other, it's a whole thing. And so with Saturn, transiting Saturn in Aquarius, being ruled by his Uranus and Mercury, with the moon, progressed moon on that Uranus, and then his Saturn is opposing his moon, it definitely gives this flavor of we're better as a group, we're better as a tribe. If one wins, we all win. Like it's throwing off the me attitude that maybe got in the way in a prior lifetime, and like, before he could go on to be a solo artist, this was something that he wanted to re-experience. And his Mars is so strong, and we've already pointed out like the Mars returns that happen, like his soul is wanting, like has these desires to get to the bottom of this as a form of his individuation process, I feel like.
Yeah. Jordyn, he's completely embracing that matriarchal energy, sharing, caring, inclusion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wonder,
Go ahead.
do you think that like, because what I learned about him, does this even segues off of what I was just talking about? Whenever we're thinking of Pluto or evolution, we're gonna have this imprint of the past. So even in the group, like he was the creative impetus, is like what everyone said. So it's like, I'm wondering if like they had come together in a prior lifetime, maybe as like a jazz band or like, or just something, not jazz, but like, I don't know, like very classical music or something, and couldn't do the deal. And in this lifetime, having to re-experience the dynamics, especially looking at his Neptune in Virgo rising, and his North Node being in Virgo in the 12th house, of experiencing being kind of a genius, and then people in your group being like, yeah, but sit down. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, getting kind of upset about it. It feels like it's like this, the hangover from a past life of being together, right? It has that vibe. So they were actually experiences that he programmed in. I feel like it's the why to help him transition into a state of more essential humility, is what I'm kind of seeing in this chart.
Yes, and tying in that with the, his Neptune in Virgo, and here's Jupiter in the 7th house in Pisces opposite that,
Mm-hmm.
a partnership, a collaboration.
And also letting one thing go in order to receive the gift, as like JWG always talked about with Jupiter.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Yeah, the only other thing that I noticed was the Venus and Saturn and the moon here, suggesting maybe creating something of lasting value, really concretizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, shall we move on to the third one?
Yes.
So, okay, this is Ram, and it was released on May 17th, 1971, with wife Linda, who he'd married in 1969. And what I thought was interesting about this is that now Venus, of course, in Gemini, has come to the midheaven. So here he is, performing with his partner, with the love of his life, actually, and also transiting asteroid Karma over here, conjunct his progressed sun in Cancer family, still in his 10th house.
I wanted to know you guys' thoughts on that Pluto conjunct his Neptune squaring his sun. Both being ruled by his Mercury with, yeah, Venus on that.
Well, and here's transiting Mercury over here in the 8th house.
Yeah, but I'm wondering like what the bottom line of is for that transit in regard to being in a partnership and creating an album. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Especially it's squaring his sun in the 10th house, and both of those being ruled by his Mercury in retrograde and the 9th.
Well, my first take was that this is his metamorphosis out of the Beatles. It's finally complete. He's finally come out as as a solo artist.
Yeah, I agree. Pluto transiting the first house generally is like a metaphor of the physical self. So like a new identity coming forward, right? You've also got, if you look at transiting South Node at 18 degrees of Leo, that's actually about to go, because the nodes move in an opposite direction. It's going to be linking to his natal moon at 17 degrees Leo.
Right.
So it's not like he was coming up to a point of closing an old chapter of identity, if you link it to the Pluto, symbolizing the past and the future. So that new identity being created with his wife, with like you said, the love of his life, because that will also have been it's squaring, like you said, his natal sun in the 10th house, so that the world kind of seeing a new Paul McCartney in a way that was coming forward, separate from the Beatles.
Yeah, and that definitely pulls in the Virgo as well, of like anytime like we have a metamorphosis or a transition. I'm going to use that word, especially with Virgo here. There is that Virgoian having to be apprentice of whatever that is, even if you've been an expert in it before. As it metamorphoses into something else, then you have to create like a new way of relating to it after that.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like we mentioned earlier, Gemini is so strong in his chart, you know, that Mercury retrograde in Gemini, and the ruler of that transiting Pluto in Virgo is also linking into that natal Gemini in the ninth house retrograde. So it's always linking back to his creative expression, what his soul was here to do, the work the soul was here to do. You know, you got Virgo being work. So it's sort of like this was definitely divinely timed, that the meeting his wife, you know, creating this album and having it released. It was a year after, well, the Beatles broke up, though not officially, but in 1970. So it's like he was always continuously doing the work, soul work. You know, it's not like he's never stopped. And we know that he's continuously been following his soul's desire ultimately.
I'm just wondering if maybe, especially seeing Ceres in his natal chart being ruled by that Neptune that is now conjunct Pluto, if this was like a time of deepening his spiritual relationship through the function of being in a relationship and co-creating with someone else, as opposed to like a whole group. That's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, like their connection, you know, having a marriage for 29 years, you know, like that's a whole Saturn return in itself. We building that structure together. This was just a start of their lasting legacy in a way, you know. This album to this day, as Sue will tell us, is an album that's been renowned as being one of the best that was created by Paul and Linda McCartney, from what I read today as well. So it's like it was always going to set its place in history, you know. So physical presence of this album, and it's going to long live post moving on to its next incarnation.
Yes, and here we have the Sun conjunct Saturn. Something lasting.
Something lasting, yeah.
Let's see, I think that's just about, one other thing.
It would have been interesting, maybe next time, linking Linda McCartney's chart with him, because it would have been very interesting to see how the album linked into her chart as well.
Yeah, there's so many little rabbit holes to go down.
Yes. Another book, maybe.
Yeah, right.
We had to bring some type of focus into all this Gemini.
We could talk for hours and days on this.
Absolutely. The other thing, another thing that I noticed was that this transiting Vesta was opposite as Pluto and transiting Mars. And here we have an opposition. Rather than a Mars return, we've got a Mars opposition, a partnership, you know, instead of, you know, is.
I feel like they definitely wrote together in a prior lifetime as well, or had put something out together in some type of way, because Jupiter transiting Jupiter retrograde opposing his ninth house energy, I find fascinating.
Conjunct Neptune.
Yeah, but it's opposing his own Uranus as well.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yes.
So it's also like taking, and because I mean there's so many paradoxes within this, right? Building off or expanding upon like what they're expressing together as a way to put it out there is like a way I look at this.
Yeah. And Eric pointed out in his book that she also lost her mother at age 20. So they had that, you know, mother grief in common. And okay, I'll finish by saying that I noticed this morning that today is the day that the Ceres Neptune opposition perfected this morning. It's been Ceres has been retrograde in Virgo for seems like forever, and they didn't quite perfect before, but it perfected this morning. So, what a day to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
What degree is it at, Sue?
27, I think, 28 maybe.
It's 27.
Degrees Virgo?
Mm-hmm. Virgo and yeah.
And then Neptune's
Opposite.
27 Pisces.
Yeah.
So wow, linking to this album. Maybe it's going to get another big special re-release.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, all of it. I mean, just the series in Neptune is just really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you for that, ladies. That was very interesting. Very, very fascinating stuff to divulge into. And just quickly moving on, we've got our inspirational quote of the month, which is by Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, "I want freedom for the full expression of my personality." I actually think Paul McCartney would agree with that as well.
No doubt.
Yeah. And before we close today's talk, I just want to highlight a couple of great books. We've got A Natural Astrology, House, Sign and Planets by some wonderful, wonderful astrologers. A great book to look into. You can purchase this on Amazon, and I'm sure Sue is going to provide the links for that. And yeah, I said book, but there's also the school's website as well. We've got the School of Evolutionary yeah, just come and check out all the material. There's a lot more books that have been written through the school as well that are a great insight to look into. Yeah, and I hope you've enjoyed today's talk, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.
We should mention though that we have an Evolutionary Astrology Conference happening October 6th through 8th. Deva is the one who's going to be hitting it off, right, Deva? And your cutie little face right there. And if you want to register, you can go to jwgaea.com and register for that. It's an online conference. You're able to have the videos afterwards. Me, Rob, and Deva are all doing classes during this, and we would love if you guys would join us. We're really excited about this. I'm really excited because there are some amazing old timers, as Kristen likes to call them, that I'm feel very honored that I get to be a part of it with everyone. So I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's actually .org, Jordyn.
.org. Thank you.
Fine. Yeah, it's .org. It's easy to say .com.
And I'll put a link. I'll put links to all of this in the description of the video too.
Yeah, so it's between October 6th to the 8th. Yeah, so just come and look at on the information is all on the website, all the different talks that are available. And yeah, it would be lovely to connect with you then as well. But we will be back next month with the archetype of Cancer. We'll see you then.
Awesome. Thank you.